I had already understood in my teenage years that this could open career doors for me. And so at the very first opportunity, and there's one moment and one anecdote that stands out for me right after high school. So I didn't have the luxury of going straight on to university again. Didn't have the financial means. So I took a break and I got a job um, where I was a trainee journalist at the time. And during my duties as a journalist, there was this business delegation that came from Martinique, from the Chamber of Commerce. And they held a press conference, and I was covering that press conference for the news. And of course, they speak French. So when I approached them to interview them and I spoke French to them, they were all, so amazed. Like, who is this Trinidadian person speaking to us in French in their own language? And so I was able to interview them. Well, I had to interview in English for the news, but we were able to chat and exchange phone numbers in the time after. And at the very first opportunity that I got many years later to travel to Martinique, um, I still had those business cards, and I can tell you, I called, I reached out to those people I had met many years before, and it was like, the time had not passed. I was able to go visit places that I would not have been able to access if I didn't speak French. And so that made it very real for me that language is a connector, language opens doors of opportunity, language bridges barriers. And so when I stepped into Martinique for the very first time, I felt like I had so many friends there because people remembered me, people remembered that connection that we had. I was being invited out to dinners, to cocktail receptions, to conferences, weekends on, somebody's boat. All doors were open to me just because I spoke their language. And it leads me to a quotation that I love from Nelson Mandela, which is, you speak to a man in a language that he understands and it goes to his head. But if you speak to a man in his language, it goes to his heart. And that really sums up the power of mastering a foreign language because you are the bridge across the language barrier when you can speak to someone in their language. And that's what I've been able to do in many circumstances right here in the Caribbean region. As I mentioned earlier, we would have had the Spanish colonial masters, the British, the French. And so, right within this small geographical space of the Caribbean, we have countries with official languages that are very different, and which can be a language barrier if you don't speak that language. But for me, because I speak these languages, French, Spanish, English, and Creole, I can literally hop from one island to the next without feeling alienated by the language because I speak these languages. And that is the power, as I say, the superpower of connecting via languages.
Thank you so much for that. That is very important. That is cool. That is really cool. All right, Creole. What do you mean by that?
So in our region, you have the official languages of our former colonial masters, and then you've had languages that have evolved here, sort of secret code languages that would have developed again among our slave ancestors. So you have in the region what would be known as dialects, as a pidgin languages, and in the case of Creole, it's major part the French Creole, which is spoken in Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and neighboring former British colonial islands of St. Lucia. I wish I had a map to show you, but St. Lucia and Dominica, former British colonial islands. But because of the geographical proximity to French-speaking Martinique and Guadeloupe, they share a Creole language, which is very similar. And so they can communicate among themselves without speaking official French or official English. And so these are languages that have developed in the region that I've also had the opportunity to learn because I lived in Haiti, I lived in Martinique for 3 years, Guadeloupe for 6 years, Haiti for 3 years, and so I've been able to learn this almost like a code language that exists today, that is used. In the case of Haiti, um, Haitian Creole is recognized alongside French as the official language of the country.
That's interesting. Which means now, if a message were to be communicated and you maybe only speak the official language and they don't want you to understand it, they can speak this language and you are cut off.
Yes. So for foreigners, and this is, I have so many anecdotes, but um, for foreigners traveling to Haiti, because French is one of the official languages, if you speak French, of course, then you can deal with the administration, you can get business done in Haiti when you speak French. But if you really want to get down into the culture of the people and really understand their mindset, their culture, their passion, you need to understand Creole. And what I've found over the years is, and this is having worked in Haiti post 2010 earthquake, where a lot of humanitarians were coming in to assist from across the globe, and the French-speaking humanitarians thought that they had an advantage, which they did. In being able to deal with the administration and attend government meetings and that kind of thing, there certainly was an advantage if you mastered French. But what I discovered for myself is that having lived previously um, in Martinique and Guadeloupe and having learned French Creole, I was able to connect with the people on the ground, the people who had been impacted by the earthquake. I was able to understand their stories, very painful stories to listen to, stories of loss, stories of death, stories of grief. But I was able to listen actively. I was able to empathize from a place of understanding their language and not being forced, so to speak, to impose French on them or to impose my native English on them. And I can tell you, Bea, that made the world of difference. I look back and I know that that was a life-changing moment for me that completely altered the trajectory of my life and my career. And it's because um, I understood Creole.
This Creole, is it a language that everybody understand and some people understand the official language? Or is it a language that you need to go to school to understand? Can you say anything about that?
Traditionally, it's the language that the parents spoke when they wanted to tell secrets in front of their children. And actually, going back to the colonial days or the early days of independence, parents did not want their children to learn or to speak the Creole. And that's still a debate that's quite active in the French countries, in particular, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint Martin, Haiti. Not so much in Haiti, but there was this notion that Creole was a code language and that if you wanted to be considered to be respectable in the eyes of the administration, then you needed to speak official French. And so you were looked down on if you spoke Creole at school in the courtyard. Um, Luckily, that has changed, and luckily for me, when I first lived in Martinique and Guadeloupe, and I was actually teaching English there. I was teaching English to primary school students, and that was my initial contact, um, real exposure to Creole, where I was listening in on the children who were speaking Creole in the courtyard during recess. And that's how I started learning the Creole